Alright, welcome to our 2018 Hazardous Communications Training class. I'm going to silence my phone. I would ask y'all to do the same thing, please. During this class, I'm going to make it short and sweet and to the point. You can see here a lot of what we're going to be talking about. For hazardous communications in 2018, I want to focus on two primary areas. The two most predominant areas, actually, that Spectra works to ensure that we communicate hazards that are associated with anything in the workplace to you, the employee, for your safety. So that's what hazardous communications is, or HAZCOM for short. It's an annual training that's required by almost every federal agency out there. Hazardous communications, OSHA requires it. Most of our local hazardous material, EPD, state environmental protection agencies are going to require that. Fire department is involved in requiring that. The DOT has requirements for it. So hazardous communications is critical. It's an area that if you have an OSHA visit, it is one of the #1 year after year after year areas that companies get cited and violated and fined for, is failure not only to have proper hazardous communications, but also to not have the hazardous communication training. So we'll have a short evaluation at the end of this that you'll do. That evaluation is twofold. It's to make sure that you learned what we talked about and to have proof that you attended the class. So you'll have a sign-up sheet and you'll have an evaluation that you'll complete. All right, I'm going to dive right in. The two areas that we want to focus primarily on regarding hazardous communications in 2018 is SDSs and labels and markings. Okay, they are the two primary areas. Now I'm going to hit the boring one first. We're going to look at safety data sheets, or SDS. You should, in all your locations, have an SDS binder. Do you know where that's at? That would be the first question I was to ask, is do you know where your hazardous communications SDS binder is kept? It may still be marked MSDS, hopefully not. Just a couple years ago, the OSHA changed the hazardous communication standard and went to the global harmonization system. The global harmonization is where the United States in particular joined the United Nations organization regarding how we are going to identify hazardous wastes and hazardous materials and dangerous goods. And in doing that, we joined a global system by which everybody has similar markings. And we're going to talk very specifically about that in a little while when we take a look at these labels. We're going to talk about it also on our SDS sheets because we'll see those same markings here. But with SDS sheets, they are essentially the same thing as an MSDS, but they're called SDS. The biggest difference, the most significant difference in an MSDS sheet, which we've known for years and years and years, and an SDS sheet, which is what we're going to take a look at today, is the SDS sheet is standardized. MSDSs, every company created their own. Some might have 6 sections, some might have 20 sections. Some might give you this information that they feel is important, but not firefighting information. Other ones might give you first aid, but not give you proper constituent numbers. So what happened with the SDS sheets, with the Global Harmonization System, or GHS, is where they came along and said, we're going to standardize this. It will have 16 sections. And not only will it have 16 sections, but those sections will be the same for every company that is required to issue an SDS sheet for dangerous goods. In many cases, with the MSDS sheets, folks would have Section 2 might be constituents. In other words, what's in it, what makes it what it is. Section 6 might be firefighting measures. Section 14 might be first aid. And on somebody else's sheet, the sections could be completely different. Well, again, with SDS, they've come back and said Section 1 will always be contact information and identification of the chemical. Section 2 will always be hazard identification. So if you want to immediately know what is hazardous about this chemical that you're using, you'd go to Section 2. And it would immediately tell you that it has these 4 hazards associated with it. And it comes down and talks about classifications, danger words, hazardous statements, and so forth. Now I have 3 different ones here that we're going to take a look at, because although they're different manufacturers, the formatting is the same. Looking here at this is actually an SDS sheet for something all of you are very familiar with, our touch-up paint, aerosol-based touch-up paint. Again, Section 1 is identification. Section 2 is hazards identification. Section 3 on all SDS sheets will always be the composition or the ingredients that make this item hazardous and make it what it is. It may not make it hazardous actually, but it makes it what it is. Section 4, you need to know this. Section 4, write this down. Section 4 will always be first aid information or first aid measures. What do you do if you're exposed to this? And it will detail skin contact, eye contact, ingestion, inhalation. It'll tell you what to do in all those cases. In many cases, let's say somebody does come into contact with a hazardous material, and for some reason, an ambulance has to be called. One of the first things that the ambulance drivers and the paramedics are going to want to see is the SDS sheet, so that they can see what the manufacturer has said needs to be done when a person comes into contact with this. Section 5, very important, firefighting measures. If you're not writing this stuff down, make some notes. You can use your notes on the evaluation. Section 4, first aid. Section 5, firefighting measures. Who needs that? Well, first responders need it, but we also need to know, what type of suitable fire extinguisher should be used. Should it be a CO2? Should it be an ABC? Should it be a halon? Should it be a purple K? What type should we use? Section 6, accidental release measures. In other words, if we spill this stuff, how do we clean it up? What's the proper way to clean it up? You don't want to put something, if you have a spill of chlorine, you don't want to put water on it. Because what happens? Chlorine and water react. So you need to know those things. So Section 6, accidental release measures, or what to do in the event of a spill. Section 7, handling and storage. Not too important to us, but it does come into play with our aerosols. I mean, you don't want to put those aerosols too high up in your warehouse. What happens to heat? It rises. Texas, California, Florida, places that get particularly hot. That heat rises, it might get up to 117, 120 degrees up near the ceiling. Is that a good place for an aerosol that can combust if it gets too much heat? Definitely not. That kind of information would be in 7. Section 8, very important. This is one that I want you to know about. Section 8 tells us about exposure controls and personal protection. That is where you would go to find out, hey, if I'm working with this chemical, what do I need to wear to protect myself? Section 8, very important. Write it down. Section 9, physical and chemical properties. That's the kind of information that I use when I'm doing a lot of our reporting on these chemicals. Section 10, stability and reactivity. Not a huge concern for us with any of our chemicals, but that's where you would find out, is this stable? Is this not stable? Is this a major concern? If so, why is it a concern? Section 11 is toxicological information. In other words, is it toxic? What kind of illnesses and damage can it cause? Both acute illnesses and chronic illnesses, and it'll talk about that in Section 11. It'll tell you a lot about what happened to mice and rats and rabbits when they exposed them to this. 11, toxicological information. 12, ecological information. How does it impact the environment? Section 13, disposal considerations. This comes into play a lot, again, on my end here for us to know how the proper way to dispose of these chemicals are. Can we just throw it in the trash can? Does it have to be regulated? Is it considered a hazardous waste? How are we going to get rid of it? How can we properly and legally get rid of it? 14, very important. You need to note this. Section 14 is transportation information. How can this be transported? What markings are required when it's transported? If we ship it by ground, if we ship it by air, if we ship it by water, what type of labeling, what type of information needs to be put on the containers, on the trucks, if we ship this, on the packages. We'll talk a lot more about that in other training classes that we have, but we will definitely touch on that some today when we look at labeling and markings. This is important information. Managers, shipping managers, branch managers, transportation managers, drivers, you need to be very familiar with Section 14. You need to read it, particularly for your touch-up paints and for your solvent-based caulks and sealants. Drivers, you're responsible. If you get out there on the road and you get pulled over by the DOT or by the state police, they are going to want to know about what's on your truck, and they're going to want to know it's marked properly. And if something is improperly done, you're going to be the first line of trouble. Okay, granted, shipping should have done it correctly. Management should have directed it correctly. My office should have set policies and procedures in place and made sure you were trained. But when the rubber meets the road, no pun intended, they are going to look at you and your license, and you're going to get a citation if this stuff is not done properly. So you need to familiarize yourself with Section 14 of the SDS for touch-up paints, caulks, and sealants. And anytime you might be given something else, particularly liquids or something that you know may have a hazardous concern, you need to be familiar with that. All right. Section 15 is regulatory information. That is information that I primarily use here in Atlanta, again, for reporting. And Section 16 is other information. So they did give us a section on the end for all the other stuff. Usually included in Section 7 and Section 16, and sometimes in Section 2, you'll find the information for your HMIS or what we call our NFPA labels. How do you know what numbers belong here? We're going to talk more about these, but how do you know where these numbers come from? You're going to find those typically in Section 16 of the MSDS, or SDS, I'm sorry. They still get called MSDS a lot. They've been MSDSs all of my life. They've been SDSs for about 2.5, 3 years. So that is, SDSs is probably the second most common way that we communicate to you the hazards that are associated with materials you use. HazCom, disclosure. Several methods of disclosure, including training, which you're going through now, SDS books, which we're talking about here, and then labeling and marking. Again, SDS sheets may look a little bit different. You saw the one here, which is just a few pages long. That one is for touch-up paint. Here's one for coatings from Valspar. It's definitely a little bit thicker. They do a little bit more testing with different animals in the labs and stuff. Has a lot more technical information on it. And then lastly, here's an example of one from P&G, Procter & Gamble. I think this is just for some Comet deodorizing cleanser. So again, in all of these, again, where do we go to find out about personal protective equipment? We go over to Section 8. Look right there, Section 8, exposure controls and personal protection. Where do we go to learn about transportation information and how to properly transport it? Section 14, transportation information. For example, right here we find that it's not regulated. There is nothing hazardous as far as the DOT or FAA is concerned, or IMDG is concerned, regarding the transportation of this. We want to find out about first aid measures. Let's look over at the Valspar sheet. First aid, what section? That's right, Section 4. Section 4, first aid. So there is a universal pattern that all SDS sheets follow now, and that is what is so very important to us and so unique about SDSs. Okay, if you have any questions, make a note of them. Write it down, talk to your manager about it, send it in, and we will address that. The second section of this class for hazardous communications for 2018 is labeling. We've got a lot of labels and a lot of markers behind us, and I want to talk about these. And again, we're going to go over them in pretty short order. I can see on the monitor that some of these are not coming through real well. I may bring the camera in so you can see them better, because it's important you understand these. Why is it important you understand these? Because these are communicating hazards to you so that you understand what hazards are associated with the chemicals and the things that you're working with. First, I'm going to come back over here and take a look up here. You see some numbers. It's just to help reference. Actually, here in Atlanta, those numbers were used for the quizzes that we had. For you, I'm just going to use them as a point of reference. Now, from dangerous all the way up, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and dangerous, these are all what we call DOT diamond shipping labels. These are actually placards. They are adhesive placards. They could be tag board. Some of them up there are tag board. They go on the outside. Typically, these go on the outside of trailers, containers, tankers. Any large quantity item is going to get these on the outside of them. We have smaller ones that we use on the smaller items, but the markings are the same. Now, very briefly, let's take a look here at number 4. You see something, that flame up top, on all of those across the top, that flame tells you that it is flammable. You don't need words. You see the word flammable, you know it's flammable. Whether it says flammable solids, or whether it does not say flammable gas, or it doesn't say flammable liquid, you know from that flame that it's flammable. In this case, the stripes, the vertical stripes tell you that it is a solid, okay, and it's a number 4. That tells you it is solid. So the flame and the 4 tell you flammable solid. The stripes also help, and the words make it pretty clear. Number 2, flammable 2 is a flammable gas. Without the words flammable gas, you know that because it's flammable, and you know 2 stands for gas. Same thing over here, flammable liquid. And number 3, flammable liquid. Now, these numbers in the middle, you say, what on earth are those numbers, and why doesn't this one have them? These don't have numbers on them. They could. It all depends on different shipping regulations that you might find in Section 14 and additional information that you would learn in hazardous materials shipping classes. But the 1950 becomes very specific. Okay, if you see 1950, you see flammable gas. Well, 1950, if you look it up in the handbook, it lists flammable or lists hazardous material guidebooks, a pocket book that a lot of drivers keep and a lot of environmental and safety professionals use. You'll find that 1950 simply means aerosols. So, if you had a whole truckload of aerosols come in, it could, it really would, it would not because of the size of that they're packaged in. You know, we talk about limited quantity and ORMD as far as because much of our stuff is packaged smaller, it doesn't have to be placarded. But an example would be by rail. When we ship aerosols by rail, they want the boxcar marked. In that case, it would have flammable gas 1950 on all 4 sides of the boxcar to indicate that that car has a quantity inside of it of aerosols. Okay? 1950 only stands for aerosols. Look over here at 1263, the flammable liquids. 1263. If you look 1263 up in the book, and you could know these by heart, you really should. You shippers should know that 1950 is aerosols. You should know that 1263 is paint. So when we receive truckloads of paint here in Atlanta and in Clearwater, where we're painting metal, coating our metals, the truck is going to have 1263 placard on all 4 sides of it. So it not only says that it's flammable and that it's a liquid, but it also says very specifically it's not, you know, it's not a, I don't know, something else that's a flammable liquid. Gasoline, it's not gasoline. The flammable liquid, you know, MEK, it's not MEK, it's paint, it's 1263. Okay, this label down here is a limited quantity label. We've talked about this many times before. This is what certain things like if we're shipping, because limited quantity does not require a placard, don't let that confuse you. For some of you, that's way more information than you need. Shippers, managers, you should be very aware of this. Limited quantity items such as our touch-up paint and caulks and sealants do not require placards on them. This would be the right one for aerosol touch-up paints, but because it's limited quantity, it doesn't require it. Now, what do you see? You see a small one of these on the box. You see a small one of these on pallets of touch-up paint, but you don't have to put them on the outside of the truck. It's an exception that is provided by the DOT because the items are packaged small for individual consumer consumption. However, IMDG, International Marine Dangerous Goods, says that if you're going to ship the caulks and sealants, for example, solvent-based caulks and sealants or touch-up paints in a container, and it's going to go over the water, it's going to go across the ocean or the Caribbean, then you have to label the outside of the container with a limited quantity label. They make these, and we stock these in a special material that will hold up for up to 2 years in salt water. So if a container even should fall overboard and sink to the bottom of the ocean, and somebody finds it finally a year later, it should still have this marking intact on the outside of it so that they know that inside there is something that meets the criteria for limited quantity. Okay, over here, corrosive. You see the chemical burning a solid item. You see the chemical burning a thumb off on the skin there. Corrosive. Acids, bases, anything that has an extremely high or an extremely low pH is going to be marked corrosive, and you know not to let it touch your skin or pour it on things because it will eat away at it. Alright, number 9. See, it's a number 8 label. This is a number 9 label. This number, limited quantity, does not have a number. Dangerous does not have a number. We'll talk about it in a minute. Number 9, it's everything else. Okay, if it's not a number 1, which I believe is explosive, if it's not a 2, which is flammable gas, it's not a 3, which is flammable liquid, if it's not a 4, which is flammable solids, if it's not a 5, which is, I believe, radioactive, or a 6, which I believe is dangerous when wet. If it's not a number 7, and I'm going to be honest with you, off the top of my head, I think 7 is an oxidizer, I believe. Those are things we don't deal with. That's why they're not up here, and it's why I'm not as familiar with those, because we don't have any 1s or 5s or 6s or 7s. An 8 is corrosive, and a 9 is everything else. If there's something dangerous about it, but it's none of those things, it gets marked a number 9. We have had some number 9 stuff ship out of here in the way of like wastewater sludge falls under the category of a number 9. Now down here you've got dangerous. This is a marking that tells you that what this is marking is what? Yeah, dangerous. It's used when you have multiple hazards on an individual truck. Let's say we had a truck and it's got some flammable solids, some flammable liquids, some flammable gas. It's got some corrosive. Okay, the item that is on there the most, let's say it has a lot of flammable liquids, a few solids, a few gases, and a few corrosives. They would likely, the driver, instead of putting 4 of these, which would be very confusing on the outside of a trailer, he's likely just going to put the one he has the most of and then a dangerous. And dangerous will cover all 3 of these. Now dangerous can't be used on radioactive or on explosive. Those have to be marked. But these can be used if you have multiple hazards that fall into these other categories. Okay? A lot of information, shippers. These are things you need to know. If you have to, go back and watch this video later and make some more notes. You need to know this stuff for your safety and for our well-being when it comes to government regulations and for the safety of other folks on the road. Okay, we're going to talk here very quickly about NFP or HMIS. NFPA stands for National Fire Protection Association. HMIS stands for Hazardous Materials International Symbol, maybe. I honestly am not certain on HMIS. I see the term but don't know. So, as I told you, you'll find this information typically in Section 2 or in Section 16 of your SDSs. And this, to me, this is one of the greatest marking tools out there. because it tells you so much. I can look at these labels and immediately tell you if it's dangerous to my health, if it's flammable, if it's radioactive, and what type of personal protection I need. All in one label. Hopefully many of you have been through this before, either at Spectra or somewhere else, and you're familiar with this marking system. Blue is a health hazard. Okay, the red box is a fire hazard. The yellow box is the stability or reactivity hazard. And the white box is for other information. Okay, so let's go back and look at each one of these. On this label, we see a 1 in the blue. Now the scale is from 0 to 4, with 0 being goose egg, nada, no hazard whatsoever. 1, 2, 3, up to 4, which tells you it is the most extreme in that area of hazard. Okay, so in this case, a 0 in red tells us what? It's not hazardous at all. A 1 in reactivity tells us it's a little unstable. It has some reactive concerns, but minor. A 2 over here in health tells us it has some moderate health concerns, okay? Moderate. I don't have a 3 anywhere up here. If we had a 3, it would tell you it has significant concerns in that area. And then when you see a 4 up here, it tells you that it is extremely, in this case, flammable. So this has no stability concerns, and it has some minor health concerns. This has some minor stability concerns and no flammable concerns. So that tells you a little bit about how that marking system works. This is used throughout our facilities. You should see this on the side of product. And that's going to tell you, as that product is stored or when you approach it, what types of concerns you have. Okay, we're getting ready to wrap up. I'm going to talk about 2 more things real quick, and then our HazCon for 2018 will be done. Okay, we've got a group of labels up here. I'm going to come back to them last, okay, because I do want to zoom in a little bit on these. If I had my cameraman in here, they could help me zoom in on these so that you could see them better. Hint, hint. These signs down here, I want you to be less concerned about the content of these signs, okay? That's why I didn't hesitate to put the stickers right over the body of information, because right now the point I want to convey to you in hazardous communication is warning, caution, danger, notice. Okay, these are calling your attention to some information. Which of these would you say is the most serious, the most significant information that you need? A, B, C, or D? If you said C, danger, you're absolutely correct. Danger is the most serious warning sign that there is. So if you see something that says danger, you need to pay attention to very seriously, take very seriously the information that it's providing. Okay, next up is warning. Warning is the second most serious. There's a warning. You need to follow those instructions. If you don't, you could be seriously injured. Most likely with danger, if you don't follow these instructions, you could be killed. Okay? Caution. Caution is something also. It is third in line. You got danger, most serious. Warning, next to most serious. Caution is third most serious. This is going to give you some information that will be beneficial to your health. I think I see my cameraman there that might be able to help me out in a minute. My camera woman. And so yeah, on caution, we're going to have to zoom in on these in a minute because you can't see them really well. So I might let you help me with that. These two in particular are hard to see. Caution. This is going to give you information that you need for your personal protection, for your personal safety. And then lastly, notice. Notice oftentimes is going to convey to you policies and procedures that you're expected to follow. In this case, it says safety glasses required beyond this point. It could say no admittance beyond this point. So, danger, most significant. Then warning, caution, and notice. You see these signs with these headers. You need to pay attention to the information on them. We are going out of our way to communicate to you the hazard that's associated behind this particular area of concern. All right, last up, we're going to take a look at 7 out of 9 GHS labels. You may recall early in the class I talked about how the SDS came about because of the GHS program, or Global Harmonization System. There are 9 labels in this system. I only have 7 of them here because these are the only 7 that apply to anything we do at Spectra. The other 2 do not apply to us. But again, this family of labels is called the Global Harmonization, or GHS labels. Now, what do you notice about all of these signs? We can just roll the whole thing in a little bit here so we can see it. I want to focus in on these real well. Just come right on in there. It's like the camera zooming in, just like on TV. That's perfect, coming right on in. And I believe you're going to be able to see those now. Very good, very good. All right, GHS. Thank you, cameraman. I'll make sure you get credits in the rolling credits after the movie is done here. But don't expect to be paid for it. So, we've got the first one up here. Should be pretty easy. First of all, what do you notice about all these labels? What is common? There's a few things that are common. Yes, they're black on white with a red box. But what else is significant about these labels? What do you notice that none of them have? That's right, words. There are no words. There are no numbers. These numbers are mine. They mean nothing except a point of reference. They have no words on them whatsoever. All they have in them is pictures, so what we might call pictograms. Okay? Excuse me. I'm getting a little dry in the throat there. It's early in the morning to be hollering. I have a tendency to feel like I'm needing to project to an audience of 1,000 when I really just need to be heard by this little microphone right here. All right, they have no words. Why do you suppose that might be? Again, remember, these are global. So why do we not want to have words? Well, because if we had to have words, how many different languages would we need all of these written in? Okay? But lacking words, as you know, this symbol, like we looked at on our other signs, means what? It means flammable. So what does this mean? What does that picture mean in Portuguese? It means flammable. What does that picture mean in Ukrainian? It means flammable. What does it mean in English? Flammable. So we don't need words. We use pictures to globally harmonize the marking of the hazards on items that we work with so that we can clearly communicate to you the hazards that are associated with what you're working on. So this one would tell you, if you see this on an item or on a wall behind an item, it would tell you that the item stored there or the item in that container is flammable. If you see this one, number 12, hopefully you can see a good picture of this right here. We've got a fish upside down. I don't know if he's just jumping out of the water. I don't think so, or if he's falling out of the tree. Fact is, we call this the dead fish, dead tree symbol, and what it actually means is that this item that this is marking is environmentally unfriendly. Okay, it means it's bad for the environment. It kills fish, it kills trees, it's bad for marine life. If something was a marine pollutant, it would have to have that sign on it. Number 13 over here, interestingly, 13 tells you that an item typically is an inhalation hazard. It can also mark items and tell you that they are acute. They cause acute illnesses. Okay, acute illnesses. Now, number 16 down here talks about chronic illnesses. Okay, let's talk about the difference in acute and chronic. Acute is something that comes on and goes away. The flu would be acute. The common cold would be an acute illness. A cut on your hand would be acute. Reason being, it will heal, or it can heal, it should heal, and it will be better. Versus chronic. Chronic is what this label, it looks like, I affectionately call this the exploding heart label. You might have that when you fall in love with your spouse, but more significantly, this tells you that the item that you're dealing with can cause an illness that will not typically go away. A carcinogen, something that causes cancer or causes cancer, any type of cancerous stuff would be marked with that. Number 14 up here, next to our exclamation point, if you can see it here, is the skull and crossbones. This is what you might see flying on top of a sailboat or a pirate ship. So that's not what it's telling us here, though. What this is telling us is death is imminent. Unfortunately, it's warning us that this item is toxic. Okay, that it has the capability to cause death. Okay, so this marks toxic. Number 15, I asked folks, I said, what is number 15? I had folks tell me it's a wine bottle. I've had folks tell me that it's a rolling pin. The reality is what this is, it's interesting because you look at this and you say, wow, that was pretty creative. The artwork on these is pretty awesome. Somebody knew what they were doing. I'm thinking when they got around to this, somebody told their first grader, hey, would you draw me a cylinder, a compressed gas cylinder? And so it even to me looks a little bit like, what is that, cricket, cricket paddle, or a paddle. So what it actually is telling you is that this is a compressed gas. Now it does not tell you, what it doesn't tell you is it says it's a gas under pressure, or compressed gas. It doesn't tell you if that gas is flammable. Not all compressed gas is flammable. Okay, so for example, our paint, touch-up paint that we talked about before, would have both compressed gas and flammable on it because it's a flammable compressed gas. Now it also has some other markings on it as well. It has both of these, or it may have those two. I'm not sure offhand. Don't have one in front of me. But the point is, this alone doesn't tell you all the hazards. So you may have multiple labels on one item to communicate all the hazards that are associated with it. So this is compressed gas. We already looked at the exploding heart or chronic illness in 17. You recognize that symbol. Same symbol that we looked at before over here on corrosive. You recall corrosive had this label as well. This is where something is damaging materials or burning a thumb off or any other body part. So this is telling you that this item is corrosive, just like the number 8 DOT label said corrosive. Okay, so that is a really quick overview of all of the concerns that we have this year for our 2018 HazCom or Hazardous Communication class. There's a lot more that could be covered, but that's what we're going to cover this year, trying to mix it up a little bit and focus in and hone in on just a couple items. So today we've learned about SDSs, we've learned about markings and labels. There is an evaluation after the class. Thank you very much. Y'all have a safe day, and remember the S in Spectra, first letter, safety first. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.